In this episode of The Bear Roars, Dan sits down with Lenval Logan, a former U.S. Air Force intelligence analyst and one of the few civilians to work directly on the government's unidentified anomalous phenomena, or UAP Task Force. Logan's path took him from maintaining nuclear-armed B-52 bombers to briefing senior military leadership inside the Pentagon. He shares various extraordinary moments during his military career, including being inside the Pentagon during 9/11. Eventually, his work led him to confront one of the most complex and controversial questions facing the defense community today. What are the unidentified objects consistently observed by military personnel, and why has there been so little public acknowledgement? Dan and Logan dig into military culture, classified programs, and the growing movement to bring transparency to a phenomenon long buried by stigma. Logan also shares what he's building next, a platform to help regular people capture, track, and analyze encounters of their own. Let's poke the bear to kick off the conversation.
All right, so Lenval Logan, and we're going to call you Logan the whole time because, as you just told me, Logan is what everyone calls you.
That's exactly right.
And we are going to talk about some crazy ass stuff over these next couple hours. And I think when we talk about this, without elaborating right now, because we're going to elaborate for the next 2 hours, I think what you're going to share with us is that you have really strong reason to believe that there is intelligent, alien, non-human life in and around us, has been for a long time, that we're in communication with it, that they're part of what we're doing, and that you're going to be able to share with us.
To the best of my knowledge, yes.
Yeah, why you believe that to be the case. And it's going to be just a fascinating discussion.
Yeah.
But before we go all there, let me first start with, you were recently, about a month ago, and I listened to it before our connection was made. You were recently a guest on Joe Rogan. So what is it like to be a guest on Joe Rogan?
It's fascinating. He is one of the most laid back individuals that I met. I mean, he kind of came in, said hi. One of the guy that was with me brought in all of his bona fides to show that, hey, I did this. I was allowed to do this. I worked here, all that stuff. And Joe just kind of looked at him and go, yeah, we won't need this. Just handed it back to him. He's like, what? And after that, he just said, hey, guys, I want you to feel relaxed. I want you to, just talk about what you can. Make sure you're not thirsty or anything. And the guy that was with me, Jason Sands, said, could we get ready? And he said, yeah, take your time. And then 2-3 minutes later, he was like, okay, let's go. Yeah. And we started. And it was so relaxing that I think it went for 2.5 hours, but to me, it felt like an hour.
Yeah.
Just real easy.
Good. Yeah. And we had a little bit of chat right before this, which was maybe 3 minutes. But usually even that first 3 minutes, I like to be starting on the mic because it's kind of nice to have that warm-up chat.
Oh, that's fine.
Comfortable. So bring us through before we get to the topic at hand.
Yeah. Bring
us through who you are and your background, kind of where you grew up, kind of what really, you're all about. I want to know more about you. And by the way, my one complaint about the Joe Rogan podcast that you were on was you were on with another person who you're friends with, colleagues with.
Yeah.
And I think he did much more of the talking than you did. So we're going to be able to go deeper with you because of that. So I'm really excited about that. So
all right.
Thanks for coming.
That's fine. So full name is Lenval Logan. I'm originally born in Nottingham, England, Sherwood Forest, all that stuff. Was born not too far from the castle. Left the UK when I was pretty young in 1978.
Because we don't hear much of an accent when you talk at all.
Well, I'll tell you the truth on that. I ended up in Philadelphia, and the girls loved my accent, and their boyfriends wanted to kill me. So it was figure out a way to get rid of the accent, because I was in England. I kid you not, we love what we call a good scrap. Let's fight.
Yeah.
I'm ready. I was like, damn, let's do this. Let's rock and roll. And next thing you know, people started pulling out knives and stuff. And I still remember telling a young guy pulled out a knife on me. And I remember saying, that's not fair. There's no knives in scrapping. And this voice behind me said, if I was you, I'd be running right now. And that person actually ended up becoming my best friend, and we're still close to this day. But it was just one of those things. I just came home and told my mom, I said, hey, Mom, I don't think I'm going to make it here very long if I don't get rid of my accent. So I spent a lot of time in the mirror trying to perfect an American accent.
Really?
It didn't leave until really like 10 years later. But I mean, I'd show up someplace and people would look at me and go, where are you from? You're not American. I was like, yeah, I am. I got an American citizen. They're like, no. Where are you actually from? And then I'd tell them from England. They're like, oh, okay. So that's pretty much where the accent died. But from there, I came to the U.S., joined the U.S. Air Force, started off as a B-52 crew chief, working on the big bombers, nuclear weapons, all that type of stuff. I got stationed. I put in, they call it a dream sheet. It's where you can put in for where you want to be stationed. It's a dream because they never send you where you want to go. So I put in to go back to England because my plan was to go back to England. At the time, your education in England used to be free. They didn't adopt the American system until later, where you had to pay for your college and whatever. So they sent me to Upper Michigan. There was a base up there called K.I. Sawyer Air Force Base. Big B-52s there flying. I did that for 4 years.
What does a B-52 crew chief do? Like what scope of responsibility would you have?
He pretty much owns the plane. And then it's his job to prep the plane for the pilots. Okay. And there could be maintenance guys, that work what we call the avionics, the electronic systems on the aircraft. There could be other guys that work the pneumatics and hydraulics and all of those stuff on the aircraft. But at the end of the day, it is your responsibility to make sure that that plane is ready for the pilot. So your name gets stenciled on the side of the aircraft, say, Sergeant such and such, or, A1C such and such. So it's your crew chief and your deputy crew chief, and you guys take care of the plane in every aspect, refueling, all that stuff. And if you're lucky, you get to be a flying B-52 crew chief so that whenever they go someplace, you go with them. And I got to travel quite a bit.
So you got to the point where you were a flying crew chief?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So I was lucky. Got to go to different bases, check out stuff. Even got to go to a couple air shows, stuff like that.
Oh, nice.
And then the only bad part, it was Upper Michigan. And as beautiful as Michigan is in the summertime, it is deadly cold in the wintertime. And I got frostbite 3 years in a row. And I said, I'm done. I'm not doing this anymore. And I just happened to have a person that says, I like the way you think. You're naturally curious. You're a fixer. You're a problem solver. He said, why don't you try something else? And I was like, well, what? And he said, you ever thought about Intel? And I was like, sure, why not? I said, if it's inside, I'll give it a try. And next thing you know, I got accepted and went to Intel school and then ended up in Germany.
Where is Intel school? Is it a specific place? Or is it?
There is, for the Air Force, there is a base called Goodfellow Air Force Base in San Angelo, Texas. And that's where the Air Force intelligence analyst goes. Some of the other services may go there to take a different part of Intel because there's different types of Intel. There's human tours. Those are like your spies and stuff like that. There's debriefers. Those are the ones that debrief someone coming in to ask questions or stuff. There's signatures that look for signals intelligence. There's so it's broken down into various degrees. There's people that just sit there and listen on the phone. Me, I was an all source analyst. So my job was to take in every aspect of different
all source?
All source. So every aspect of information, whether it was an imagery thing or a signals thing or a human tour coming in, and look at the whole scope of things and do analysis on the information to determine that it's true, it's accurate, those type of things. And then I would brief either pilots or the special ops guys that I would work for and then tell them what's going on.
And before we get into the topic of the conversation, what are other examples of where you'd use the all source to help decipher a set of events?
So just about every unit has an all source analyst. The all source analysts are usually the ones that brief the actual operations guy. So if it's a pilot, I'm the one that's telling him, hey, if you're going in this area, there's a weapon system down here, 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 here. You may want to do X, Y, and Z to get rid of it, to maneuver away from it. Or, hey, they've got fighters aircraft over here, and you may want to know what type of aircraft. If we can, we would tell them what type of weapon system that is, or bombs or missiles that are on that aircraft, to make sure we know that our capability can defeat their capability. And if it's something of a significant threat, you'd say, stay away, avoid. And then if it's like special ops guys, you're telling them similar type information, but it may be just a little bit more detailed, because special ops guys aren't usually flying. They're usually on the ground, shooting, scooting, doing those type things. Mm-hmm. So you're letting them know, hey, when you go into this place, here's the type of threats that you may have. And then here's how you would deal with X type of threat. And, whatever it takes, because the pilots will come back and they'll be like, hey, Logan, you were telling me about this weapon system. I can't remember the range. And so you'll remind them what the range is. If it's not something that's automatically put into the computer system, you may say, for a special ops guy, you may say, hey, the enemy wears this type of uniform, but if you see the uniform with like a red mark on it or something, it might be another part of that person's military service, but they are maybe they're the equivalent of our own special ops. So you'll let them know. That way they have some heads up as to what they're dealing with.
Gotcha.
They don't get caught off guard. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Good deal.
So from there, I cross-trained into Intel. My first base was Bitburg Air Force Base in Germany. I don't know if you've ever drank Bitburger Pils beer.
No.
Really cool thing. It's a thing, but the cool thing about the base was that the base was right next to the brewery, and what they used to do was they used to use the heat base housing as from part of the brewing process of the beer. Oh. So there was a very, very close relationship between the town of Bitburg and Bitburg Air Base. They loved us as Americans. They sponsored our sports teams, stuff like that. You name it, they were involved. I mean, the relationship was so close that actually, when you first got to the base, part of the base included a tour of the brewery, and they would leave you with, the German mugs and stuff like that. And when you were leaving, they gave you, hey, sorry that you're going. Here's a videotape of some of the things in Germany that you're going to miss. Please come back after you're done. But it was a really good relationship there. And then after that, I went to various other units, and then I ended up on the air staff. And then after I left the air staff, I worked as a contractor.
When you say on the air staff, what does that mean?
The air staff is you're working at the Pentagon at the headquarters. Okay. So the Army staff is all the Army generals and everything. On the air staff, I monitored different intel programs and different aspects of intel. And I worked with the chief master sergeant, who was the person that talked to all the enlisted people about the changes, administrative stuff that's going to be taking place in the Air Force with our career field, those type of things. Yep.
And during this time, I'm assuming your security clearances are getting deeper and deeper.
Well, it's, how do you say, they get higher, right? And then at a certain point, they spread wider.
Okay.
Think of it as you move from the first floor up to the third floor. Once you get to the third floor, what you're seeing is a hallway with a whole bunch of rooms. And maybe the first two rooms everybody goes into because it's pretty much general. But after that, you may only be able to go into room 7 and maybe 19. And another person can go into 7 too, but he goes into 18. But you can't talk about what 18 and 19 are to each other unless you're properly cleared. There's a need to know those type of things.
Gotcha. Okay, so now you're at the air, what do you call it?
Air staff.
Staff.
Yeah. So
you're what age at this point, roughly?
Oh gosh. I don't even remember because I don't really keep track of my age that much.
What year roughly?
This was around, I was there from 2000 to 2007. So my second day in the Pentagon. So I came in that Monday. So let me explain a little bit more. I went there to get my degree in intelligence, not just I I'm an analyst, but I actually have a bachelor's degree in intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
And I had just finished that up at a place used to be called the Joint Military Intelligence Center. And then I got my assignment to the air staff. I came in that Monday. Life was good. That Tuesday, that's when the plane hit the building and 9/11 and all that other stuff. So baptism by fire, so to speak, working at the air staff as what we would call a staff officer.
Yeah, the world pretty much changed at that moment in time.
Right. So I was feeling pretty lucky because, it's a 5-sided building, and I was the plane hit this side of the building, and I was on the corner on this side of the building.
So you were actually in the Pentagon when it got hit.
The whole building when it got hit, because that side of the building where the plane hit was going under maintenance. They were updating the building and fixing all kind of stuff. When the plane hit the building, you actually felt the building shift back a little bit and then come forward. And I just looked at the major that was with me and I said, those maintenance guys are pretty rough on the building. And then some lady came in and said, what are you guys doing here? Don't you know a plane hit the building? And we're looking at her like, because I don't know if you remember, like a week before or so, there was a Cessna plane that flew into the IRS building.
No, I don't remember that.
Yeah, there was a Cessna plane that flew into the IRS building in Tampa, Florida. So when we heard a plane hit the building, we're like, oh, another one.
Yeah.
And then we turned on the TV and it showed Israel and Palestine fighting or something or another. And then all of a sudden they just said, breaking news. And we saw the second plane go into the other tower. And that's when I was like, based on what I know, ma'am, I said, this is deliberate. We need to get out of here. And we walked down, tried to get out of the building. But because that part of the building was still going under renovations, all that part was chained up and blocked. So everybody just kind of got locked in the stairwell. And so me and the major that was with me, we jumped to the left and walked out another door. And we were all dressed in what we call our dress blues. And that's when the smoke from the airplane hitting the building just kind of went through us. And all of a sudden you start seeing the blackness and the soot stuff and leaving on your uniform. And I was told, I still remember this. I was told, hey, Logan, I know one of the colonels that I was going to be working for said, hey, Logan, I know you just got here. He said, get home, get by your phone, and we'll call you. And I still have my British humor. So, I play with things. So the very next morning, I get this phone call and it says, okay, report to the Pentagon and you will go to this office. And I was being just a smart aleck. And I was just like, hey, sir, ever since I was a wee little laddie, they always tell you never go back into a burning building because the Pentagon was still on fire. And he said, you will get your ass over there. Yes, sir. Yes, I will.
All right.
And that's how I got started and started prepping for all the activities that took place after that.
Yep. And so what were you doing in the weeks and months after 9/11?
I worked in a special cell that just, I was fortunate to, I was into technology and capabilities and stuff like that. So part of my job was briefing the chief of staff, it was General Jumper at the time, and a bunch of the other generals that were with him. I would brief them on whatever happened the day before. I would brief them on what is currently happening now. And then I would give them an estimate of what we thought was going to happen within the next 24 to 48 hours. And then some other people would come in and say, based on the intel assessment of what we think is going to happen in the next 24 to 48 hours, here's what we're planning. And then they would brief him, and that would just be a regular cycle. We got so good at the cycle because I was so new in the building. Nobody actually knew what office I was assigned to. So after 6 months, 7 months, and all this is going on, someone said, "Hey, Logan, I haven't seen you take a break." And I was like, "From what?" And he said, "From doing this." He said, are you going to take some time off? And I said, yeah, sure. And then like a month goes by, and he goes, "You still didn't take a break." I was like, I'm not even sure who I work for. And then finally they went and found the list that showed who I work for. And they said, okay, we're going to get somebody to replace you for about a week, take some time off and decompress, and then get back to work.
Gotcha. Okay, so you're doing that for a period of time. Walk us through when do you start working your way toward kind of the program?
Okay. So I retired from the Air Staff in Air Force in 2007. And I went and worked for various contractors and companies and stuff like that. And I was in this one particular area, talking to some people. And then I saw the article about Lou Elizondo coming out and talking about the task force that he was on, OSAP and ATIP. And I was already curious about those, and I can go back and explain why. But because I saw something when I was a kid in England, and I had saw something also when I was going to Germany that I just couldn't explain.
Yeah, and we'll come back to those.
Right. So I approached Lou Elizondo, and I was like, hey, Miss Elizondo, you don't know me, I don't know you, but I'm a problem solver, and it seems you have a pretty interesting problem. And
so tell us I know who Lou is, but tell us who Lou is.
So
and what he was doing at that point
in time. Lou
had
just resigned his position as the director of ATIP, which was the program that it wasn't specifically looking at UFOs. It was specifically looking at what the problem the pilots were facing. The pilots kept saying that every time they were doing training, there was something out there on the range that was interfering with their training. And they were trying to figure out what it was. Was this a foreign collection against our F-18 capability or F-22 or whatever? They just know that something was out there. And the pilots kept talking about it, but they weren't getting the response they needed. So what they ended up doing was they started filing safety reports, just safety report after safety report. There's something on the range. There's something on the range. And
these pilots are weird geographically.
So they're at Naval Air Station. I think it's Oceana, near Virginia Beach. And what was going on there was the pilots were flying. You know who Ryan Graves is?
Yes.
Okay, I'll get to him in a second. But Lou and everybody on that program, they were just trying to figure out what a lot of these things were. And they were showing advanced capabilities. So now the program kind of changed a little bit because they were like, well, what are we really facing here? Is it that the foreign adversaries that we might have to deal with, do they have an advanced capability beyond what we have? Mm-hmm. I mean, you're talking fighter aircraft that are highly maneuverable, but dealing with the threat or whatever this thing was, they were leaving us like we were standing still. They would come up from behind. So you've got an F-18 cruising away, something would come up from behind. While he's flying, it would look like it stopped with them, and it would go on top, to the side, below, come back up, and then accelerate past them like they were nothing. Think of someone driving a Honda, the old days, I don't know if you remember a Honda CRX, all right? Those, they're, 4 cylinders, not slow, but not necessarily fast. But then you've got something like a Ferrari that comes by and leaves you in the dust. Mm-hmm. This is pretty much what they were dealing with. And then sometimes they would see stuff that was just out there.
But we were, our F-16 was the Ferrari. So we think we're in the Ferrari of the world.
Between the F-16, the F-18, the F-15, the F-22, we're thinking we've got the line of Ferraris and Lamborghinis all lined up, ready to go. And these things were playing with our pilots. So we're like, crap, if this is what the bad guy has, we're in for a world of hurt. And then the more we started looking at it, we came to the understanding this may not be our bad guys. It may be another bad guy. Yeah. And so my whole focus on this was...
And let's pause for a second. So you mentioned Lou. Lou is one of the best known, and we'll get into him, I'm sure, several times in the story. Been on, Joe's podcast multiple times.
Yes.
Wrote a great book. What's the title of his book? I've recommended his book multiple times. Yeah.
I can't remember.
Imminent.
I'd have to look it up right now because I read the book, but
Yeah. So
but,
he tells a lot of very detailed stories. He's testified in front of Congress.
yes,
Under oath.
yes,
And everything he's disclosed with the permission of the U.S. government.
Right.
Or at least the U.S.
Right.
government has had an opportunity to tell him not to
right.
disclose. So we'll bring him up multiple times, but he's one of the most
He's
well-recognized
probably the
at
most
this point.
well-known. David Grush is another guy. Jay Stratton is another guy. Carl Nell.
Mhm.
All these guys I had a chance to interact with when I was supporting the task force. But
So
Lou,
you introduce yourself to Lou.
right. So I introduced myself to Lou, and where I was working, you needed a high clearance. So I was like, I said, if you're really serious about this, I said, stop by my office. And he goes,
But you're outside of the government now.
but I was a contractor working for another agency.
Okay, gotcha.
All right. So I just said, stop by my office. Because at that other agency, I was a problem solver. That's pretty much what I did. I would look at problems that different people are having and try to figure out, does the technology exist to solve this problem? And then I would write up a proposal, give it to the person that had the problem. If they liked it, they would say, yeah, could you do that for us? And then we got money to go fix their problem and everybody's happy. So I was like, well, this is going to be interesting. And so I let him know. And the very next week, he shows up with Jay Stratton, Chris Mellon, and another bunch of guys, entourage, fighter pilots, all this stuff. And they present their problem. And it was quite interesting. And they told me their problem. I said, hey, what about this? What about this? We went back and forth a little bit.
At that point, did they think it was a foreign adversary, or were they suspecting it was something significantly different than that?
We didn't want to say aliens because that's not what it was. We just want to say NHI, or we called it the third rail. You don't ever want to touch the third rail if you don't have to.
NHI for our viewers is non-human
intelligence. So we were always thinking it's got to be the Chinese, it's got to be the Russians, or it's got to be someone else that we just don't know, right? So the more we kept looking at the capability, it came down to someone that we just don't know. And so my thing was friend or foe. So when they came in and talked to us, and we said, well, have you checked this? Have you checked that? What about this? And we went back and forth forever. And then finally,
what were they able to show you? Were they able to show you, photos, video from the planes, or was it just them relaying what they experienced?
For the most part, it was a discussion, and then the photos and things started coming out. It was mostly photos, if I remember, and I think I brought up a video because I challenged them and I said, what about this thing here? And I pulled, showed them an image of something. And they said, we have reason to believe that that's pretty much something mundane, nothing to worry about. And I said, are you sure? And they said, hey, our experts have said that it's nothing mundane. So I said, hold that thought. And I think what I did was I showed them a video of the exact same thing somewhere else. And it was performing in a weird way, that you wouldn't see in an image. And they were like, whoa, where'd you get that from? I said, I have friends in low places that send me stuff. I still remember them looking at me. And they were like, okay, we're going to have to go back and reassess this particular one. And so when they were leaving, all of a sudden, Jay Stratton said something to Lou. And then Lou turned back to me and said, you're in. And I was like, in what? He goes, you'll see. And next thing you know, I'm receiving all this data that I have to analyze. And again, I'm an all source analyst. So when you see things like stuff you see on the TV, my particular point of view is, okay, it's a video of something really unusual. However, as the all source analyst, I want to know, was there any signals that came off it? Did anything come off it Did it perform weirdly? And more importantly, I want to know, before that pilot videotaped what he saw, what was so compelling for him to say, this is out of the norm and I need to record this so I can bring this back? And the video will tell you one story, but the debriefing, if you will tell you another story. And sometimes they're in lockstep with each other. Sometimes they sound so different from each other. You're like, okay, are we talking about the same thing?
Why would they sound so different?
Because when the pilot saw something, it was doing something really unique, exotic, that was like, whoa. And sometimes these things, it seems like they can almost perceive that they're being watched. And then all of a sudden they start doing something mundane, just cruising along at like a regular speed. And you're like, those are just balloons, right? And then, so somebody will easily sit there and just from the video and say, there's nothing to see here. Those are balloons. But when you actually talk to the operator, oh boy, they're excited. They're like, Mr. Logan, you didn't see how it did this. It moved here. It did this. Da, da, da. And then I talked to my boss, and my boss said, record it. And then as soon as we started recording, it was like, just cruising along and nothing to see here, And we were like, are you sure? And then he would say, it looks like this. But when we looked at it from another aspect, it didn't look like that at all. So we were like, okay, what is going on here? And, you feel like you're being pranked. But when you hear the sincerity in the guy's or in the operator's voice, male or female, and they're talking about it, you now know whatever it was affected them deeply, because they're talking to you just kind of casually, like I'm casually talking to you now. But then when you ask them to recall what happened, their whole demeanor changes, their body changes. You can see them not just trying to describe what they saw, they were actually trying to understand what they saw, because it wasn't fitting inside their regular scope of what they know to be up there flying around and maneuvering, whether it was something in the water or whether it was something flying around.
This is the first time you brought up something in the water.
Yeah.
What do you mean when you say something in the water? A lot of people are reviewing this.
Okay, I
know
apologize.
very little about the current UAP, UFO.
So we used to call UFOs, UFOs, unidentified flying object. And then, but whenever we used that term, people started to think little green men. Mm-hmm. So Jay Stratton came up with the term unidentified aerial phenomena. And so we said, okay, there's something flying in the air. But then later on, we started seeing objects that were in the water doing weird things coming out of the water, okay? And so the term changed from unidentified aerial phenomena, which is UAP, to unidentified anomalous phenomena, which is still UAP. So we had to take in all the reports from the Navy.
And when you say come out of the water, but also go back in the water, yes, and maneuver within the water in ways that
100%
are way beyond.
There's videos just that people are taking like off the, there's a couple YouTube videos actually off the coast of Pensacola. And you'll see there's a F-18 flying. He's like doing a real slow flyby. And all of a sudden you saw this object come just shooting out of the water, getting straight up, just straight ascend. And this thing is small. There's no way anything could have shot it out of the water, at least from what we could see from the video. There was nothing to explain that this was a artifact, that was something wrong with the video. Because those are the things that we do. We take it to a video expert and say, go through this with a fine-tooth comb. Tell me anything that jumps out at you. So that's what we would do. One of the things that used to happen when I first started working with the task force was I called a bunch of guys that were video experts and I said, I really need you to just analyze this for me. I said, please don't, it's not about how weird it is, but I'm actually looking for some nuts and bolts things to tell me what it is that we're seeing. And they called me back and they were like, we just watched this. Are you serious? And I was like, yes. And they was like, okay, come by our office. And the first couple times I went by their office, they would cue the X-Files music and all these aluminum hats would come out and everybody's sitting there and they're all laughing at me and everything. And I was like, okay, but did you figure out what it is? And then they would look serious and everything. And they're like, no, but where'd you get this from? And we'd have a discussion. And after a couple times, still cued the X-Files music, but there was no more aluminum hats. Everybody was on that screen going, okay, we don't think it's this. We think it could be this. We break it down. We put this in this box. We put that in that box. And then we go back and look and then say, okay, now that we've established a box to put it in, let's call up all the experts that would deal with those particular things that we just put in the box and say, what is that? And majority of the time, the guy would just come back and go, I don't know what that is, but it sure isn't what I think it is. It's not what I'm an expert in. And we would go from there. Those would be the points that would let us know that we're really onto something. So we would have a box that would say, pretty mundane, and we can identify what this thing is. There was there's something unusual about this. We don't know what it is. So let's come back and take a look at it, especially after we collect more information. Could there be other things that look just like this that we could sit there and go, okay, now we know what it is. It's something mundane, or no, it truly is something unusual. And then there was the, holy crap, we don't know what the hell that is.
Okay, so we're going to come back to this spot, but I want to rise this up a little bit. So we're going to come back and we're going to talk through a lot more of the specifics, but I'm going to raise this way up. Based on your collective experience, your collective interactions with the other experts, do you believe there is non-human intelligence?
Yes.
50%, 60%,
100%.
100%. Do you believe that we've been in communication with that non-human intelligence?
I tend to believe yes, but that's not something I'm definitive on. The thing that gets me to say yes is just the way the government has reacted to all this. I just lean to yes.
Okay. Do you think that we've recovered spacecraft from this non-human intelligence?
I have no definitive proof, but I believe yes.
Okay. And then we'll get into later why and where these answers are coming from.
For the first time, Dan Caruso pulls back the curtain in his book Bandwidth, a memoir that celebrates the pioneers who invented the internet's early backbones, the renegades who lit the fiber revolution, the antics that caused the biggest market crash of all time, and the new wave of entrepreneurs who led the industry back from its ashes. Though it seemed to happen in the blink of an eye, the Bandwidth adventure was a multi-decade roller coaster ride involving larger-than-life successes and devastating failures. The unbridled ambition of newly minted billionaires and high-profile tycoons created extraordinary value, unprecedented value destruction, and endless opportunities for a brave few. This reflects tech's past, present, and future, and is a story you won't soon forget. It will help you prosper during today's AI tech bubble. The book is available at dan-caruso.com/bandwidthbook and released in early 2025.
To what level do you think that we've had encounters with non-human intelligence, physical encounters? I know you said you're not 100% convinced, right, but you've heard people talk about that a lot. Do you think that is more likely, less likely?
I think it's more likely.
Yeah.
And so you got to remember the task force, as we were put, even though it's UAP, unidentified anomalous phenomena, we were geared towards what can we do to help the pilots. Mm-hmm. I mean, imagine this. You've got all these pilots that are, the best of the best. They're working in tight formation, and then something small that looks like a square black cube inside of a sphere, a transparent sphere with no engine, no control surfaces or whatever, goes flying in between them to the point where it scared the crap out of them and they broke formation. All right. And we would have stuff that you would hear about that where out over the Virginia Beach, there would be some high winds going, and the pilots would, their aircraft is buffeting from the winds, and they're looking at this thing and they see this thing out there over the water, and it's not moving with the wind at all. It's rock steady. Okay. And they're like, something's on the range again. So every time they would come in, each pilot would write, there's something on the range, and it's right where we're supposed to be training. And sooner or later, they would keep writing, we're going to have a mishap. And the problem that they were worried about was someone was going to say it was pilot error without anybody else knowing that there was something else out on the range. And that was what was bothering them the most, that they were doing their job. They're getting interference. They keep writing it up. Nobody's acknowledging them that there's something out there, and then something would happen and it's his fault, the pilot's fault. There's been times back in history, there's, I think his name was Mantell, and there was another guy that was in the Midwest where he supposedly chased an aircraft and his aircraft just augered into the ground. And people were wondering, did an alien shooting down or did something else happen? There's another pilot that was over the, I think it was Lake Superior. And they said they saw his aircraft go up. And then all of a sudden his aircraft just comes flying back down. And that's it. That's all she wrote. And the question was, first of all, the reports come back, he was chasing Venus. That's an insult to a pilot, all right? I think a pilot would know if he's chasing a star, all right? But they come up with all these other reasons as to why it wasn't. And then the last thing is, oh, we believe he didn't put his oxygen mask on. So when he got to a certain altitude, he passed out and that was it, right? But if you really go back and look at some of these things, you're like, especially when you talk to really experienced pilots, they're like, Logan, you're a flyer. You know what Venus looks like. Do you think that, okay, I got you. I got you. And that's the part that really was convincing me, because as you talk to a ground observer or a pilot, when they describe what they're seeing and you're trying to play devil's advocate, just to peel back the onion layer to say, what is it that you really saw? And they get in your face because they're so tired of people challenging them like they don't know what's going on. And I've kind of said this out in public. I think that we've done a disservice to a lot of the airmen or pilots or even the ground observers, but especially the pilots, because imagine this. You're the best in your game, all right? And then you see something extraordinary. And now after that, everybody questions you about your thought process, what you saw, whatever. Your credibility has just gone like this to this just because you're doing what you're supposed to do. Back in World War II, and I think coming forward up until I think the 80s and the 90s, there used to be something called service. And it used to be that, especially after World War II, if you saw something, you were supposed to report it because they didn't know if it was going to be a foreign adversary coming over the US or whatever. So it would tell you to report it. But whenever it came to this particular subject, it got thumbs down and nobody wanted to report it. Nobody had anything to say. They would tell people you saw swamp gas. They would, all these really stupid. And I'm like, how stupid do they think the American people are? And the people that were right there that experienced it, they're like, their lives are being ruined. And the rest of the world or the US is like, oh yeah, it had to be swamp gas. That's what the government said. Because I truly believe that up until the whole UFO thing blew up from Roswell, up until that point, I think everybody truly trusted the US government. And then after that point, you were sitting there going, someone's lying. And I don't think that guy is lying. But leadership is.
So when you're talking about and I know we just scratched the surface, when you're talking about these instances, is it like less than a dozen instances that you think of? Is it 50? Is it 100? Is it 1,000?
It's a lot. I don't have a specific number, but
many dozens.
Many dozens.
Maybe in excess of hundreds.
So there's these things that are, I've seen multiple videos of things. I've seen multiple images of things. And you look at them and you go, that's unusual. But when you go back and look into the analysis being done, and they come up with some truly stupid answer, you're sitting there rubbing your head going, that's not what if I was the analyst, I wouldn't have come to that conclusion. So you're wondering, was this a junior analyst who just doesn't know what he's doing? Or was this a deliberate cover-up to about something? And these are all these things that make you go, something's not right here.
Yep. And so a lot of people, you've already kind of mentioned London and Germany. A lot of people, when they hear about this, is like, why is this only happening in the U.S.?
It's not.
How much is happening all over the world?
There's stuff happening all over the world. So you got to understand, because this will probably make your audience understand a little bit better. All right. We're the U.S. government, part of the military, and we are part of the UAP Task Force, right? Under Executive Order 12333, we are not allowed to use intelligence assets to collect on U.S. people. So we're not going to collect over the U.S. That's not what we do. We deal with things that are happening outside of the U.S. Now, the stuff off the coast of Virginia Beach, it was outside of the international lines, but because it's U.S. assets, our own assets, we were allowed to investigate those. But if it's something that happens in the U.S., that's not our job. That's like the FBI or somebody like that to take a look at the problem set and figure out what's going on. So we would look at the problem. If there was something that we saw that coincided with the civilian seeing it, we would ask to see if we could get that information as well to corroborate what was going on. And as we were developing our procedures to look into this, one of the problems that we had was internally, we were not given any money. Everything had to be taken out of hide. So our boss, Jay Stratton, being the smart guy that he is, said, we need to leverage. We need to leverage the intelligence community across the full width and breadth of the community, overseas, stateside, because somebody else may have some insight that they could give to us for us to figure out what these things are. And they're not all the same. Some look like nuts and bolts aircraft or something. Some look like orbs, some small, some big.
When you say orbs, what does orbs mean?
Think
Orbs
of it like a
often
plasma ball or something, but it's moving intelligently. Think of if there was a ball of energy and it just went towards the couch that you have here and it passed through the couch. That would be one thing, right? But what if the ball of energy went towards the couch and then said, oops, there's a couch here, and let me move to the side and go around it and then come back and then keep going what I'm doing. That's what we started to see. Something that was moving intelligently, and we couldn't figure it out. And I've had a bunch of people approach me and they're like, are you sure these aren't demons and whatever? Because, it's stuff that you read in the Bible and some other, and my thought is, because they were like, well, you should leave it alone, stay away from it, it's demonology, whatever. My thought is if it is demonology, regardless, we should be finding out as much about it as possible so we can fight it. Don't just bury your head in the sand and go, well, maybe it won't notice me. Let's figure out what's going on. I'm not saying, run into it and stab it, whatever, I tell everybody jokes with me. I tell everybody, we call all the paranormal type things, we call it the woo. That's just our nickname.
The woo?
Yeah, the woo. WOO. And because I was invited out to go out to, I don't know if you've heard of Skinwalker Ranch.
Yeah.
Okay.
I want to talk more about that.
So
actually, let's talk more about that right now since you mentioned it.
Okay.
What is Skinwalker Ranch? And
so
because it's a pretty
Skinwalker Ranch is a ranch in the Uinta Basin in Utah where there's been a variety of UAP, cryptid, and paranormal activity. Cryptid is something like Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Loch Ness Monster, a creature that's not supposed to exist, but it exists. Now there at Skinwalker Ranch, they've seen what they describe as a wolf man, where it looks like a wolf, but it's standing on two legs and moving, okay? But there's been paranormal activity where people have heard footsteps behind them. They've seen things past them, and then they look again, and then there was nothing there. And then they see UAP, and there's a TV show about it with Dr. Travis Taylor. So Travis will tell you, he says, I no longer want to know. I no longer, just a believer. I'm a knower because I've seen these things now. And he says, but damn it, if I was to tell you what they actually are, because he said, it's like they play with us. It's like on the ranch, something will happen over here and you'll start paying attention to this. And meanwhile, there's stuff going on in the background and you're like, what? And then you turn this way and you try to focus on this thing and then something else happens over here. So they've just had a lot of things. And there was at a time, the U.S. Army was very interested in this place. So they rented the land and did investigations. One of the persons that was involved in the investigation was a colonel named Colonel John Alexander. And I had the opportunity to sit down with him and talk to him. And I told him, I said, we need to find a better way to go after this. And he was like, 100%. And I'll talk about it later, but I told him I was building this app to go after all these things. And he said, yes. He said, because all three activities are happening. And what we're worried about is if you only concentrate on one, you might be missing the rest of the story on the others because they seem to all interact. If you ask anybody dealing with the paranormal, if they've been around for a while, they'll say at the same time they see paranormal activity, they will also see UAP as well. Sometimes they'll see even a cryptid. And I'm like, I'm not sure how all these things are related, but let's figure it out. And I had a certain type of arrogance when I first joined the task force because I was like, okay, I've seen these things before in my past, but I'm going to be the one to come in here and I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to be the man, you know? Mm-hmm. And the more questions you ask, the more questions you get back. You don't get the answers that you want. Mm-hmm. So you start slowing yourself down and go, okay, I got to methodically go through all this information. And then I got to take it to someone who I think is smarter than me and say, hey, did I miss something? They would tell me if I missed it. Hey, Logan, you didn't look at this. Oh, okay, got it. Go back and look at it and then come back and say, what do we have here? And a lot of times we're just still sitting there scratching our heads going, we can't say what it is. We can tell you everything. We can explain everything that we described, but we can't tell you everything or be 100%. This is this. You know, it's like if you saw an F-15 aircraft, you would be able to sit there and say, okay, dual engines, dual fans, da-da-da-da-da, can move at Mach 2, blah, blah, blah. You go through the whole thing and say, okay, this is definitely an F-15. But when you go through these things, they all can look different. Not all of them are moving at a high rate of speed. Some of them go into the water at a high rate of speed and don't slow down. You know, you would think that hitting the water would give some kind of friction and slow you down or whatever. You don't see them slow down. You don't even see a rooster tail sometimes coming out of the water after they hit the water, and you're like, what is going on here? So all the things that these things are showing to us, we're just thinking it's a physics of a kind that we don't fully understand yet. But we've seen it multiple times.
And a science that,
right,
that we have yet to fully get our heads around. I've heard people talk about potentially, I try to stay current on theoretical physics, on quantum, on the applications of string theory. And string theory is still a theory, but if you believe in string theory, it suggests there's many other dimensions beyond the dimensions that we sense.
I think Stephen Hawking showed mathematically that there were up to 11 dimensions. And so I think, again, not because of maybe because of our ignorance and maybe because of what we've learned, we've always been taught that time is the fourth dimension. And I'm pretty sure people will question what I'm about to say, but even if you're in the first dimension, there's still a time factor. So it's first dimension plus time. second dimension plus time, third dimension plus time. So what is really the fourth dimension? There's something else there plus time. And we have to figure that out because these things have displayed a technology way beyond our scope. One of the stories, this is not any type of classified information, but it's just seen this in some of the stories several times that the UAP was standing in front of someone and it turned a light on, like a spotlight. The spotlight wasn't an instant on. It came out of the craft slowly. And then right before it got to the person, it stopped right in front of their face. And they said when they did look, they said it was like looking down a tunnel. You know, what's all that about? You know, so these things are displaying capabilities that so far neither the US, China, Russia, or any other nation has showcased. And one of the reasons why I believe that these things have an NHI behind them is because I tend to believe that anytime, especially here in the US, if we have a capability that is like the stealth fighter, we heard about the stealth fighter before it came out, and then it came out, and then we saw it, right? These particular things have been going on for 80 plus years, and they still haven't come out. So I'm like, well, if it's ours, what are we waiting on? Mm-hmm. If it's Russia or China, what are they waiting on? You know, they still haven't shown themselves. So one would tend to believe some of the conspiracy theories that there is another agenda here, another thing going on that is just beyond the veil, if you will, for us to realize and fully understand. So we have to take the time to start collecting data and start to fully understand, or hopefully fully understand, what these things are.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned this has been going on for a long period of time. Earlier, you mentioned the Bible. You know, there's reports, more than reports. There's paintings on walls in from prehistoric times. There's
stories.
There's stories from religious texts, from cultures that go back as far back as the human memory.
Yes.
That bring up similar themes to this, themes and drawings that look an awful lot like an alien, look an awful lot like a spaceship, even maybe looks like what you describe an orb to look like. So
100%. So last weekend, I was at the Oregon Ghost Convention. A friend of mine, he's very much into the paranormal. He said, hey, why don't you come out here and listen? Because I'm understanding there's a woo aspect to the UFO, UAP situation, I'm trying to understand what this woo stuff is. And I had, the first time I went there was 3 years ago. I had two elderly Asian ladies show up. And I did a talk and said, hey, I'm trying to create an app and to track UAP, paranormal, cryptid activity. You know, my name is Logan. I used to be on the UAP Task Force and such. And they were watching me to the point where I kind of joke with everybody. I said, they were watching me so intently move across the stage. I thought like maybe my fly were down or something like that, you know? But I came down off the stage and they just did a beeline towards me and they said, Mr. Logan, can you tell us what these things are? And I said, I don't know. And she pulled out her phone. She had an iPhone. And there was the most pristine, beautiful, white bluish orb sitting in a doorway. And I was like, whoa, where did you get that from? She said, that was in my house. And I said, can you tell me about it? And she said I think she said it was her birthday. And she had overdid it. So she told the family she was going to take a nap. And she fell asleep in her room. And then she said she heard something like a scratching sound. And then it turned the sound turned to like charged electricity. And she said this thing oozed its way through her wall. So she screams. The whole family comes running, and the thing had floated across her room to her doorway. So it blocked anybody from going in and blocked anybody from going out.
Yeah, could they see it on the other side of the door?
Yes. I mean, it was in the doorway. So the door was open. And she said for about 5 minutes, it just sat there breathing like it was going in and out, getting larger, smaller. And they just sat there. So, everybody's like, oh my God. And her son grabbed the phone and took a picture because he was like, what is this, Mom? And she didn't know. So she said after 5 minutes, it just stopped, went back to the wall, and oozed itself right through the wall again. And she said you could still hear that charged electricity and everything. And she goes, so what is this, Mr. Logan? And I was like, I don't know. So I've gone back 2 years now straight, hoping that these two ladies will show up so I can get a copy of the picture, because I was so excited to hear their story. And when they left, I didn't get a copy of the image, So, and so we're trying to put characteristics to these things, maybe by the size, maybe by the color it gives off. Like our best guess is a blue orb. It's not that they're deliberately trying to do anything to you, but it seems that if people are coming to physical contact with the blue orb, they seem to get some type of cancer. We're not sure what's going on, but that's the best guess that we have. Red orbs seem to not do anything to anybody, but they all seem to be able to pass through matter. We've seen green orbs. We've seen gold orbs. We've seen orbs change colors. But could we definitively say what they are? We don't know. So, this begs the question, how much data are we collecting? And where's all the data going? And one of the things I had asked Jay Stratton, and he said,
and tell us who Jay Stratton is.
Jay Stratton was the director of the UAP Task Force. He was like the equivalent of like a 2-star general. Mm-hmm. And he told us to lean forward to try and find out anything that we could. And so he was the one that told us to leverage and work the system, try to characterize as much information as possible, document it, and let's figure out what we're dealing with. And so we would look at all these things and try to figure out what the locations were. Was there a preponderance of a unique, very specific area? Was there a repetitive motion? Would it come back every 3 days, whatever? Was it always the same color? All these different things, aspects, so that we could sit there and go, okay, if we need to come back and see this thing, hey, sir, maybe we can set up a honeypot and be over here and be ready for it with all the G-Wiz cameras and things like that. And it was always, we think so. And then we tried to set up and wait for it, and then nothing would happen. Again, it was like they were playing with us. They knew that we're hanging out waiting for them.
Do the major governments share information with one another? Are there people within China, within U.S., within Russia?
At the time, no. I do know that the group that took over after I left the task force, which is called Arrow, supposedly they've had what they call Five Eyes meeting, which is with our allied partners, the UK, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada, to start sharing information. But I only think they're getting part of the information. Why? I typically, when I go out, I play this game of, have you heard of the 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon, the game?
Oh, yes.
All right. Well, what I do is if I get 6 or more people together and they know what I'm working on, I usually ask them, I said, okay, out of you guys, how many of you have had some type of cryptid, paranormal, or UAP activity? And on average, I usually get 2 within a group of 6. That's a lot of information that's out there, I even tried to flip it and go, because Congress was there asking for more people to step forward and, especially whistleblowers.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because a lot of people don't realize this, that there recently has been congressional hearings on this topic where people from within the program have testified under oath.
Yes.
That there's been a whistleblower law to protect people to come out and share the information. Tell us about,
So yes. So they've stepped forward, And
They being Congress?
Congress has stepped forward to say, okay, we'd like to know more about these programs if they truly exist. And these individuals that they call whistleblowers have stepped forward and have told crazy things and stories to Congress
Under oath.
And about, actually seeing these things, touching these things, whatever. That there is NHI that's out there. And that's why I can say that I believe NHI is actually out there, this non-human intelligence. But because I didn't do the touchy-feely, whatever, I can't say definitively, yes, But I would say I'm in the 90 percentile to go along with some of this stuff. Now, not all of them describe the same thing. But, there have been what you would call tall grays and little grays, creatures that seem to have no ears. They're about 3.5 to 4.5 feet tall. And then there's tall grays that are like 6, 7 feet tall. And we're trying to figure out what's that relationship. We've got guesses. We think that the small grays are actually some type of android type thing because they don't typically talk. They don't typically display any type of emotion. They're like drones. They just do what they're supposed to do. But with people that have been engaged with the tall grays, or sometimes they're called the white grays because they're variation, they'll say that they'll actually get some feedback from these things. These things will talk to them. Like some of them will say, hey, just relax. This isn't going to take very long. We'll put you back where we got you from.
And by talk, they're communicating
telepathically. They're communicating telepathically, yes. And in some cases, it's been known that when people were in a lot of pain, the tall gray creature would apologize, come by, touch them on the forehead, and they said all pain would go away, or they would just fall asleep. And so that shows that there could be some type of compassion as, hey, we've got something to do. You squealing and jumping all over the place ain't helping, so we'll relax you so that you can let us do what we need to do. What it is that they're really trying to do, we don't know. I tell people about.
And what other? So you said tall grays.
Short grays. Tall grays, short grays. There's what we call the Nordics that look like they're blue-eyed, blonde-haired individuals. But they've got really pale skin. There are what we've heard called the draconians that look like it's a very intelligent lizard that it can communicate. And we've heard that they're cold-blooded and they don't show a lot of emotion, but that could be people anticipating based on the fact that it's a lizard, because people will overlay their fears and beliefs on what they see sometimes. And then there's another one, which is kind of an unusual NHI that is called the mantids, and it looks like a 6-7 foot praying mantis. That would scare the crap out of me, but it's called them. We call them mantids, but they just call them like a praying mantis. And again, these things show a high degree of intelligence, and they've communicated with people. So we have to take all these things into consideration. Like my first question is, okay, you're a praying mantis, you're 7 foot tall. How do you build a spaceship when you've got those claws? You don't have that high fidelity. Those are the type of things I think about. And then with the others, I had to ask the question, does nature have a grand design? Because it seems like all these people, or NHI, ended up with a torso, one head, 2 arms, 2 feet. So what does that mean? We don't know. So you've got to ask all these basic questions, and you feel like you're starting over again in kindergarten. Like, okay, excuse me. What about this? What about this? Why did it do that? Why did it do that? And when you don't get an answer, you're getting a little frustrated. By the way, I try to tell everybody, if you're going to deal in this subject, come with a sense of humor, because if not, you're going to burn out real quick. I say that as in, I tell everybody that I'm Black and I don't do the woo stuff. It's just one of those things, and they laugh at me and everything. But there's a little bit of seriousness to this. And the reason why I say that is we talked about Skinwalker Ranch earlier. Travis Taylor, when he was first working the show, we had talked. And I said, Travis, I have a bunch of people that think outside the box. I'd like to come out there and just kind of see what's going on. And he goes, let me talk to Brandon Fugel. Let me figure out what we can do to have you guys come out. So I had this group of people, all intel analysts, different types.
Like who can go on Skinwalker Ranch? Who can't?
It's up to Brandon because he owns the ranch. Okay. And
how did he end up owning it? Because he bought it fairly recently.
He bought it from Bob Bigelow, Robert Bigelow, the millionaire that run, I think, is Bigelow Aerospace, and he has a bunch of other stuff. But he's been very curious into the whole UAP phenomena, and so I had about 25 people, and I said, hey guys, we've got the opportunity to possibly go out to Skinwalker Ranch. I can only take about 10 people who would like to go. All the white people put their hands up and all the black people were like, yeah. And I was like, ooh, that's quite telling, what's going on here. Now I had my own reservations and I was like, guys, what's going on here? And all the white people were like, hey, this is amazing. And who wouldn't want to experience all this? Went back to the black guys and gal that was there and said, why wouldn't you want to go? And there's a thing that they call the hitchhiker effect. And it seems that there are some very dark things that happen at Skinwalker Ranch. And depending on whether or not it likes you, it will follow you home when you leave. So this place is in Utah. You go back to Maryland and all of a sudden weird stuff started happening at your house. So people in the black community, black culture, I should say, we were taught from an early age about these things, but to be very careful around them. We were told if the woo happens to you, embrace it. It's there for you. But don't deliberately go running towards the woo because it might be meant for somebody else and you just interfered with it. And now it's because you're not the right person, it has become hostile. And I've heard of some people that have had PTSD issues from some of the things that have happened at the ranch. Now, I don't know if it's well known, but I've heard that even during the filming of Skinwalker Ranch, that they've gone through quite a few cameramen because of some of the activities of this hitchhiker effect. And a lot of people have had some, like I said, some severe PTSD issues from it. But they're handling it. So the hope is that, one, if you do go there, it's nothing that's going to follow you back. But again, if it is following you back, now we need another set of tools to investigate that. And in the first season of Skinwalker Ranch, there was a gentleman named Dr. Jim Segala. And Dr. Jim Segala has put together a protocol and some tools and everything to track the woo. And one of the things that we've seen is that some people that have been to the ranch that are geographically separated, when one thing happens to one, it will also happen to the other.
Quantum entanglement.
Yes, quantum entanglement. And so the idea is to try and understand these things and document these things. And Dr. Segala has about these tools. He has about 1,000 of them that are people have already ordered and said, we want to check because they're either having paranormal activities at their house, they're in a hot spot seeing things flying over their head, they've seen cryptids. So the idea is any of this thing measurable that we can predict or figure out, catch their biological effects, with the new watches that are out there, eye watches and whatever, smart watches, even the Aura rings or whatever, and placing certain things around your house can we pick up any type of energy or signal that is giving us some indication that something's happened? I mean, we've had people go on vacation and all of a sudden their neighbors call because there's something going on in their house, weird lights or whatever, and nobody knows what's going on. And so the guy says, hey, take a picture for me. And just as the guy goes to take a picture, everything goes normal again. So it's like these things are deliberately playing with them.
So, and you went to Skinwalker Ranch?
Nope, didn't do it yet.
Oh, you didn't do it yet? I'm one of the people you're going to bring with me? Is that what you're saying?
I tell everybody that if you see me on Skinwalker Ranch, so first of all, I realize I do have to embrace the woo at some point, but I'm not in a rush to do it. So if you see me at Skinwalker Ranch, I have a plan. I will not be the slowest runner. Okay. However, I'm willing to be open-minded and see what's out there, and
So tell us about the experience you had when you were young and the experience you had in Germany.
Yes. So one of them we found out purely by accident. So when I was about 11 years old, this is probably around 76, 77, 78 time frame. A friend of mine we had a tennis ball, and we were throwing it back and forth. And I don't know if you remember when back in the day when people used to wrap their sneakers around the telephone lines.
Yep.
So we're throwing the ball. There's the sneakers on the telephone line. But then I happen to look, and way off in the distance, there is something that looks like an iron that you would iron your clothes with. The whole bottom part is glowing like sunset orange red. And it's just sitting there in the sky. And I said, hey, what's that? My friend said, oh, there's got to be a helicopter because it's not moving. I was like, I don't hear any noise. And he's like, yeah, good point. I don't hear any noise either. So we're watching it for about 5 minutes, and all of a sudden this thing comes out of nowhere. 2 Air Force jets come out of nowhere and are heading right towards it. And this thing just goes zip, and it's gone. And they're still chasing after it. So I remember us running in to talk to my friend's mom, and she was like, shut up, you guys got too much imagination. Go eat your food, and blah, 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 blah. So didn't think about it. And then last year, I was at a SCU conference, which is Scientific Coalition of UAP Studies, which is in Huntsville, Alabama. And I met a friend there, and he said, let's go into the bookstore and talk about what you plan to do with your app and stuff like that. And when we were leaving, he said, let's grab a magazine, because there was a UFO magazine there. I was like, dude, why are we getting this magazine? There's nothing new in it that you and I don't know about, But what was interesting was in this magazine, there was something that said, here are some of the unusual shapes of UAP. They called it UFO in the magazine. And there was my triangle. And it was the first time I'd seen it since. I was so excited. I sent a letter to the editor. Hey, tell me everything about this, where it was seen, da-da-da-da-da. Never got a response. So luckily, I know Ross Colhart. And so he was going to look into reaching out to the editor and seeing what he could do to find out about where this thing was seen and what it was. Now, what happened later, in 1990, just as the wall was coming down, before the wall came down, all through the 70s and the 80s, we used to have an exercise called Reforger in Europe. All the Army guys that are probably listening to this probably remember this thing because it was a really big exercise in Europe. And it stood for Return of Forces Back to Germany. After the wall came down, that exercise disappeared. So I was on one of the last flights that went to Germany. And it was also coincided with my first intel assignment to Bitburg, Germany that I mentioned earlier. So we're on the flight, and somewhere between Iceland and Scotland, the sun is just coming up. And we look outside, and there is a diamond head thing going into the clouds and coming out on a different vector. And it was like it was kind of doing this zigzag whatever. And I was like, what is that? And I was eating a cheesesteak. And I asked the gentleman next to me, and I said, do you see that? He goes, yeah. What is that? I was like, I just asked you what that was. Come on. What do you think it is? And it went into the clouds and jumped around a bit. And while I was thinking about it, I was like, ooh, this is my first intel assignment. I'm going to get cleared on some really cool stuff. So
you're thinking it's something to do with the military?
Something to do with our military. So I shut up and said, just keep my mouth shut. So I get to my unit, which is an F-15 unit. And I go to my weapons and tactics officer a few weeks after I'd been there and said, hey, what's out there that does the weird stuff? Because nobody had said anything up until that point. I had my clearances, I had my ticket, and nobody had mentioned anything weird ziggy-zagging around. So I'm like, hey, what's it? And he's like, what are you talking about? And so I just kind of played it off. No big deal, just whatever. So Desert Storm happens. I come back, and now there's a British AWACS that lands on our base. And they're passing by, and they go, hey, you're one of us. What are you doing with the Americans? And I was like, long story. And I explained to them, and they said, hey, you should come fly with us. So I asked my boss. He said, hey, you're on flying status already from being a B-52 crew chief. Yeah, go for it. So we get up there, and we're over the top of Europe, somewhere over Germany, but we can see for miles around. And I say, what is out there that's doing the ziggy-zaggy weird thing? And he goes, hold on. And he puts this tape in, and they show an SR-71 on the screen. And at the time, I was like, yeah, that guy. And he goes, that's your SR-71, and they're playing with me. And I was like, then that's not him. I said, the one that does the weird ziggy-zaggy thing. So they pull out another tape or something and plug it in and said, you mean like this? And sure enough, every sweep of that radar, there is this thing that is jumping from one spot to another. I mean, it's going like hundreds of miles in like a sweep of radar. It's not moving like these other aircraft, as they're chugging along. This thing is just all over the place.
Jumping all over.
And I said, I was so excited. I said, yeah, that guy, that MF right there, and they're like, I
so
said,
they're
no,
thinking it's U.S. technology?
Right. They said, Logan. And I was like, no, I don't. They're like, come on, Logan, you know who this is. I said, I don't know who this is, or else why would I be asking you? And they said, we've just always assumed this, you Americans playing with us because we have vectored aircraft towards it. We've called them up on the radio multiple times. They never answer. And I'm like, what do you mean? You've tried all these things. I said, how often have you seen these things? They said, all the time. And I said, and you've never made contact with these things? He said, no, they never let us get close to them. And I was like, okay. So then I got, obviously last year I was in James Fox's movie, The Program. And at the end of the summer, James sends me an email. And says,
which is a great documentary.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Fantastic,
but
yeah.
James did all the work. I just sat there and did the Vanna White and looked good.
Yeah. His other one, too, about the Brazil.
Yeah.
Was it Brazil incident?
Varginha.
I mean, that is just,
well, you should keep an eye. He's looking to do an update on that.
Is he?
Yes.
Is there some other documentary that just came out at South by Southwest? Or?
That's called The Age of Disclosure. That's by Dan Farah.
Is that out already?
It's not out there. If I remember correctly, they're still looking for a distributor.
Okay.
But it's out. I was in that, but I think I ended up on the editing room floor, so it's all good. But the thing that I was trying to tell you about what happened with James Fox was he said, you haven't seen the whole video. You've only seen the part that you're in. I want your opinion on what you think. And he starts going over what was seen in Calvine, Scotland, was this weird diamond-shaped thing that nobody was talking about because the two people that originally took the picture, they got threatened and then they disappeared. And nobody's seen them ever since. And I saw that. I was so excited. I was like, James, that's the thing I saw flying over Scotland. And he goes, no shit. And I go, yeah. And he goes, Logan, that would make sense. I said, why? He said, you saw your thing in January 1990. the picture of this thing was taken in August 1990 and in the area around Northern Scotland. So I was like, whoa. Now, what I was excited about was because I had told these guys and the AWACS guys, I said, you're an AWACS. I said, US has AWACS, NATO has AWACS, Britain, Russia, Israel, Japan, all have AWACS, similar capability. I said, so maybe they've all seen this thing. And this is why I come back to where you're talking about the sharing of information. I don't know if there was any information shared, but one would make the assumption that at some point they've all been seeing these things. And I said, who knows this in your unit? And he said, everybody knows it in our unit, but we don't discuss it. I said, why not? He says, because people lose their jobs when they discuss it. And he said, so that's why we just kind of thought it was some American black program, blah, 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 and we weren't supposed to know about it. I was like, then why would they just do it where everybody can see it? And he goes, hey, that's you Americans. You're on your own. And I was like, okay, I'm going to leave it at that. But again, that just shows you that there's data out there, but maybe because the fear, the ridicule, or for whatever reason, people aren't talking. And Ryan Graves, I think he said maybe 85% of the data that's out there is not being reported because of the fear and the stigma and all the other things that go along with it. So we've got to find a way to bring the stigma level down so that we can have people start doing better reporting. So what I did was I created an app. That's pretty much what this is, called Phenom. And the idea is to have people use the app to report on UAP, paranormal, and cryptids. And what the app is doing is, it's when we talk to a lot of individuals, they will sit there and they're so excited and so overwhelmed by the experience. They don't always remember exactly where they were. They don't always remember the time and stuff like that. So what this app does is it makes it easier. You use the app, it takes a snapshot, 15 seconds of video, and then it keeps repeating that process until you stop. And for UAP, what is going on is it's taking your GPS position, it's taking the GPS time, it's taking the angle that you're looking at, it's looking at what bearing, all those things, and capturing all that information and putting it into a database so that we can compare the video and all the other metadata.
Does it require the individual to have that app, know to use it, know to trigger it when they're experiencing something?
The app is pretty easy to use. So usually the people that download it, they're already interested in the subject. Then there's a big red button that looks just like this, and you hit it and it starts doing its thing. Now, to capture other information, we put a debrief tool in there. And the debrief tool is for something that maybe you remembered, like me telling you about what I saw in England. There's no video evidence, but maybe in the description or the discussion that we're having, there's some key piece of information that person can provide to something that we're seeing now. It could be a triangle. It could be a plasma ball. It could be anything. It could be even be the paranormal stuff. But the idea is to give people a voice. But it does allow them to be anonymous so that they don't have to feel like they're giving up the ghost and that they have to deal with the stigma issues and everything. The anonymous capability came from the pilots coming to me and saying, if you put some anonymous function in there, we'll use it. I actually, when I was working, I actually had 3 Navy guys come up to me. 2 were in uniform, 1 was not. And they said, are you Logan? And I said, yes. And they said, we'd like to talk to you about the weird stuff flying around. And I was like, come back to my office. And they dragged me into a broom closet and said, what the hell's going on? And I'm like, what do you mean? And they said, we've seen these things for 30, 40 years. And every time someone talks about it, they lose their job and they're told not to talk about it. The commanders don't want to know anything. Nobody wants to talk about this. And now you're just all talking all willy-nilly about it. What's going on? And I said, well, we've had some problems over Virginia Beach. And there's something called a range filer report. You can sign it and whatever. And I said, it's a new era, gentlemen. Stigma level's going down, and we want to report because it's a pilot safety issue. And you could see the look in their face like they were trying to figure out how to deal with this. And I said, do you want to file a report? And they're like, hell no. They're like, we're not putting our name on anything. I said, oh, you can be anonymous. And they looked at me for a second like they were contemplating it. And then they said, no, we're going to take a wait and see approach and see what's happening with all this. Now, so the idea is that, like the things that we're seeing over New Jersey, people can use the app to capture all that information. We can provide that to the sheriff department, law enforcement, whatever, so they can figure out if it's something bad or whatever the case may be. I had one woman tell me that when one of those drones over New York happened, she said that it was, she said there was something weird about it. And I said, what's weird? She said, yeah, you can see the rotors and the flashing lights and all this stuff. But she said, one of them came low, real low over my house, she said. And I said, what was weird about that? She said, Logan, this thing was huge, not a typical drone. But she said, it was making the sound like a helicopter. I was like, okay. And she said, well, my husband and I were talking about it. And she said, something was missing, but we couldn't figure out what it was. And finally, they figured it out. They said, when something that large comes over your house, she said if it was a helicopter and it sounded like a helicopter, you would get that reverberation in your chest coming off those rotors spinning around. She said there was none of that. She said it was almost like the sound was pre-recorded to make people feel or think that it was a helo. So what am I supposed to do with that? I got to do more investigation. I got to figure out, why did that happen and work with other people to gather as much information to figure out what is truly going on with this. There's the USOs. There's a video on X or Twitter, whatever you want to call it, where there's a bunch of people in a cruise ship and they're chilling, looking out the ocean, and there's this glowing thing in the water, and it just comes right past the cruise ship and just keeps going. They're all there with their cameras taking the picture, but they don't know what it is. We would like to know what these things are. There are some things that are small, and there are some reports of some humongous things. I'm talking football field size, and they pass by and they don't make any noise. We've had reports of security police guys guarding a facility, and life is fine. And he said all of a sudden he notices all the insects go quiet. So he's looking around trying to figure out what's going on. And then all of a sudden he hears this very low-pitched hum. And then he looks up, and there's this huge craft cruising over the top of him. Not even speeding, probably doing like 5-10 miles an hour, just casually going over his head. So he tries to pick up the phone to call in. The phones aren't working. All the lights go off. And it wasn't until this thing got a certain degree away from them or certain distance away from them that all of a sudden the lights came on and the phone started working again and all those other things. And he's like, I don't want to talk about this. And the reason why I'm trying to push this thing, I'm trying to get back to something here, which is the PTSD issue. There's a case in Zimbabwe where it's called, there's a video documentary called Ariel. It's about about 60 kids in Africa.
Yeah, it's
right?
crazy.
So imagine this. You're at a missionary school where you're being taught Christian values.
This is 1970s?
1990, around 1997.
97.
Yeah.
And the recent documentary on it then revisits what were kids now in their adult life.
And they're still telling the same story.
They're telling the same story and dozens of them.
Right. So there was 60 plus kids there originally. And so imagine that you're at a Christian school being taught Christian values by these teachers. Something that we would call miraculous happens. And now the teacher doesn't even believe you. Imagine what that would do to your psyche as a kid. The people that they're supposed to trust the most, and they can't even talk to them because they saw something for real. And now the teachers are telling them that they didn't see it. Mm-hmm. So take that a step further now. You've got law enforcement officers, pilots, professionals out there. They see something And now all of a sudden they're being ridiculed and dismissed because all they said was they saw something unusual. And because of the stigma that we put around this thing, they've started having to have PTSD issues. I have a person, I know a person that he was with some friends. He's in the military. He's with some friends. And the UAP that he saw came down real close so that everybody could see it. But he started having nightmares about it later. So he goes into his military psychologist, and they are trying to convince him that he didn't see anything. And if it wasn't for the anchor that he had with his friends who saw it as well, he said, Logan, I think I'd be in a straitjacket because they were so busy just trying to convince me that there's nothing to see here. And then I started thinking about how many other people are going through those exact same things that need help and they're not getting it. And the reason why the way I'm trying to phrase this is, look at it from this point of view. The military does a great job in building us up to go fight a war. When all of that is done and that person retires for whatever reason, there's not really an apparatus to bring us back down. They just kind of let you out into the wild. And then we have guys that are committing suicide because of either something they saw, something they interpreted, something that happened to them, and they feel like they have nowhere to go. So I'm trying to, as I'm doing this UAP stuff, I'm trying to be a voice for those guys that are suffering from PTSD issues so that we can help them as well. Because I've seen some of the effects, especially just talking to an observer like I'm talking to you, and I'm seeing all those, his body language change. He's pulling on his finger. I've seen one guy, when he's talking to people, every time he started recalling something, he would bite his knuckle. And I was like, dude, are you okay? And he's like, I'm just a little frustrated. He says, I don't understand what I saw. And you coming and talking to me, he said, no offense, Ms. Logan, but I feel like I'm reliving the whole thing. And it's scary to me because I don't have a bucket in my brain to put this in. It's just an outlier. And I have nobody to go to. And so there's groups like Unhidden and a couple other groups that are starting to stand up. They're trying to find a way to get, Unhidden's in the UK. And that's a group where they're trying to get the government to stand up and acknowledge that UAP exists and that people need help. And they're trying to get a group in the US also to do the same type of thing. But you got to understand, if a person in the military saw something and what they saw is deemed as classified, who can they talk to? Yeah. There's nobody there to help them. So we're trying to find, or they're trying to find ways that they can talk about it without breaking their oath or anything like that. Maybe having someone that is in the military that is aware of classified, but they can still talk to. Because lawyers have that kind of ability to help people. So why can't we have medical professionals that do the same?
Makes sense. So based on what a lot of people have reported, there's something about nuclear facilities and UAPs. Tell us about what that dynamic's all about.
So there's speculation out there that there were already a group of NHIs already in our part of the galaxy or whatever the case may be. But after we started letting off nukes, it caught the attention of a bunch of other NHIs that are out there. And they're interested in what we're doing with nuclear things. Russia, the US, and other places, they've shown that there are reports of either NHI or UAP showing up at bases that have nuclear weapons. And the reason why we think they're very interested in the Navy is because you've got a nuclear aircraft carrier. Because there's been reports that they've shown up around an aircraft carrier that was getting ready to deploy to the Middle East. The aircraft carrier deployed to the Middle East, and the whole time they were on the move, these things were following them. Stayed with them on their deployment and then followed them all the way back. These reports have been going on since the early 40s, or I should say probably right after the Manhattan Project, but there's indications that they were aware of some things even before that. But nuclear material, those type of things, seem to have got the NHI's attention. So we're trying to look at more of those facilities, and they seem to have the preponderance of more reports than just an everyday thing. Again, it's about trying to understand, what are they interested in? Is it plutonium? Is it uranium? Is it something else? Or, but we do know that we've even seen them around electrical power plants, but the electrical power plants were connected to a nuclear facility. So you've got to try and figure out, what is that connection? We don't know why, but those are some of the speculation that whenever we're using, especially in the 80s and 90s when we're testing nukes and whatever, it brought a lot of attention to our corner of the universe. And that's why there's a preponderance of NHI and UAP.
So you mentioned earlier, and we didn't even spend much time on it, the different forms of alien work. But you also said early on here that you've never had any direct interaction, nor
I've only seen things. I haven't had a direct interaction. Stuff that I've.
So where did those descriptions come from? Is that just what people in the community have described, talked about?
Yes. Either we saw them in the official video or image that we received, or it was something that was talked about, and they gave an explanation saying this is what we saw. But one of the unique aspects to this particular problem is you've got your assistants here. We could all see the same thing at the same time and all come back with a different perspective of what we saw. And we don't know why that is. We're guessing, but we don't have a firm answer as to why that could be.
And is it general perception that the NHIs are friendly to humans, unfriendly? How do we think about that?
So there have been stories where the NHI are friendly, but we've heard other stories where they're not as friendly. Now, an interesting aspect of it is that even when a person says they've been abducted and they were very cruel things were done to them, later on, it's like they think it's like they turn a corner and they said, you know what? Now that it's over and I haven't experienced any of that anymore, I feel like I'm kind of special because they picked me. So we're not sure what all that means. Is that, kind of like a hostage starting to love their, the person that took them hostage. But there have been some bad things. If you listen to what David Grush says, there has been some people that have been killed, whether it's by NHI or maybe one of our own people because it's a secret or whatever. But there's nothing, I've seen nothing definitive to say that, but I'm open-minded. So, and the way the story has gone, I tend to think that there's something to it.
Yep. So how do you think this is going to play out over the next 5-10 years? Do you think, the governments will start to disclose a lot more? Do you think it will continue to be this mystery as to why do there seem to be so many instances people talk about, yet it's still hard to fully believe? When do you think this comes to more full light?
I think that the powers that be that are, whoever's in control of all this stuff, if we've really got a program and they haven't, I think they would rather us look at other things because they've got more important things to do. Because if bad things were done in this program, people are going to have to answer for that. And probably they don't want to deal with that.
Bad things like what?
Like maybe people getting murdered, killed, whatever the case may be. Or don't even go that far. I've had one lady tell me, she said, I know that the US government is involved in all this, and I was abducted and da-da-da-da-da-da. And the moment it comes out, I'm suing the government. Why would you want to put yourself in that kind of a position? Just keep your mouth shut and keep your program going and do what you need to do. Various aspects of this belief in the program. needs to be addressed in a certain way that the American people, or even the people of the world, can think that their best interest is being looked at in this very unusual phenomena. And as it is right now, I don't think that they believe that their best interest is being met. So I think if the people that had this program were to come out, it would be met with a lot of hostility. Something needs to be done. I don't know what that is. All I know is that I want to know if friend or foe, and I want to collect as much data as possible, because I don't really think you need the government to figure out what these things are. I think the NHI themselves are reaching out and communicating with the people of Earth beyond probably what the government has said. And I'll take a step back. I also think that, because you're asking about the future, I think there was some kind of preparation going on. The kids in Zimbabwe, there's been multiple reports of UAP coming down at schools in Australia, England, France, all over the world. And they have tried to communicate to these kids. I don't know if it's to prevent ontological shock or whatever, but obviously something was going on there from the late 50s all the way to the late 90s, where they were specifically approaching children. I mean, think about it. Next time, like your grandkids or your kids say, hey, there's a monster in the closet. What if they're real? What if the monster was not really a monster? He was just something different trying to communicate with your kid, but you're blowing it off, and the kids are like, well, I'm never telling mom and dad again that I saw something in the closet. But now we have to be a little bit more open-minded, because it seems like a lot of the things that we've heard about in the Bible, about miraculous things that have happened, well, maybe it was just a technology that we didn't understand at the time, and those things are real. And to kind of extrapolate as to what's going to happen in the future, I don't really have a good answer for you, but I know that we, the people, are going to have to be a lot more careful and listen carefully to what the government is saying about it. Because 1 minute, for the things in New Jersey, 1 minute President Biden was saying, hey, we've checked into this stuff. Nobody knows what's going on. President Trump takes office. Hey, it's the FAA. So you tell me Biden didn't know it was the FAA? He's the president of the United States, and nobody told him that it was the FAA before. There's all these.
Probably told him, but he forgot.
But there's other things like that where there's some little incongruencies. Like for me, I went from the UAP Task Force and I left because Jay Stratton told me, he said, I'm leaving government. And I said, what do you mean you're leaving government? What about this new organization? I thought you were going to run it, or, Carl Nell or some of these other people are going to run it. And he said, no, I'm leaving. And I said, do you want to tell me why? He says, it's just time for me to leave. And one of the things that really nudged in my head was he asked me, he said, Logan, give the new group called Arrow as much help as you can. And I tried to talk to them and let them know when certain things were going on. And they gave me the Heisman. They didn't want to know. And then I thought about it and I was like, you've got this wealth of knowledge that was part of the UAP Task Force, and none of them got asked to be a part of Arrow. That means, to me, in my head, new regime, new mission, and it's not what we think it is. Don't know what it is, but something's not right. So I just kind of backed up and said, I'm going to press with the app, and I'm going to try and work with the people around the world to figure out what we can collect together and what we can actually figure out together. And I've got, what I call my gray beards. Dr. Jacques Vallée, Hal Puthoff, Dr. Eric Davis, Travis Taylor, all these geniuses that if I do catch something that is an extreme outlier, that's really unusual, I can go to them with what I've got and say, okay, let's figure this out. That's my hope.
Crazy. Well, I don't even know where to go with all this stuff, because I've seen enough relative to documentaries, relative to
You've never had a sighting
podcasts.
of your own?
No, I've never experienced anything, but it is hard for me to believe that this is just a fabrication of
100%.
people's imaginations or of untruths. It's hard for me to, not believe there's something significant to what people like you are saying. And it frustrates me, frankly, like I'm sure it does a lot of folks, that more isn't shared with us. I think we deserve to know. We deserve to understand this. I'm curious, but I also feel like as that as a human, this shouldn't be out there and us not
100%.
know about it or it be murky when it doesn't need to be as murky. Yeah. I'm hoping that the new regime, in their commitment to be more transparent, that they are able to share a lot more. I don't know. Are you getting any sense that there's something underway there where they're going to
I'm getting a
be more
sense
transparent?
that there are people trying to engage, but I don't know where that's going to fall or what it's going to look like or whatever. Again, I'm trying to say that we, the people, have the power because we're everywhere and there's an abundance of data that we're not getting. On Joe Rogan, I talked about what I call the Cuban anomaly. It came out, we heard all about it, and then all of a sudden, nothing. For years, nothing. And
what was the Cuban
So
anomaly?
the Cuban anomaly is that there is something that looks like it was an underground, a facility or a bunch of buildings that are all in the pattern of like a city that is about 13 miles west of Cuba. And I brought it up on Joe Rogan.
13 miles west Cuba in the ocean?
Yeah, it's under the water.
Underwater?
Way down there. And you would need an ROV to actually go look at it. The people that found it by accident. And I told Joe Rogan, I said, there's going to be things like this that pop up all over the world because they're mysteries. And for whatever reason, our attention has been diverted away from them, just like UAP. So the idea is, let's take this stuff from fringe and bring it back into academia. And so if this Cuban anomaly is right off the coast of the US, why aren't we taking a look? And luckily for me, shortly after I brought it up on Joe Rogan, someone has stepped forward and said that they would be willing to support an excursion to go look for it. And so we're going to do our due diligence and do our homework to make sure that we're not wasting this person's time and hopefully go out there and go find out if it's really there. And if it's really there, then the next question is, now what do we do? Because it's sitting there and it's either a treasure trove or it's not. Yeah. Or there's nothing there and, we go look at something else. But there's all these mysteries that are popping up.
Yeah, the Graham Hancock.
100%.
Those stories. And it seems like evidence is popping up.
Yes.
It seems to be supportive
to keep taking
of
us
theories.
back further and further and further as to when humans were around. Because my family's very religious and they used to tell me, hey, the earth is only like 6,000 years old. And, and I'm like, okay, but we had dinosaurs, and they're like, well, the Bible does talk about behemoths and stuff like that, but it's still only 6,000 years old. And I was like, okay, science says it's longer. Who wrote the Bible? It's someone that probably didn't know about dinosaurs and that, the other stuff. So now that we've started to pull back that onion layer, there's a lot further to go. So we got to figure out how do we get our collective stuff together and then go find out what these things are, because it could only, one, you're only going to become more knowledgeable, but in that search for more knowledge, who knows, it could be a game changer that changes the world. Mm-hmm. And we're just not paying attention to it because we've been away from it.
All that splash that came out, about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, about structures underneath the pyramids.
100%.
Yeah. Although, that should be something that is verifiable, and yet it hasn't.
Yeah. So my understanding, and I could be wrong, was that there was an official report that was supposed to come out, but someone leaked it ahead of time, and this started all the speculation. And usually what I do is when something first comes out, I just keep doing what I'm doing until all the noise drops down to a reasonable level. Then I'll go and see what's real and what's not, because there are so many people throwing grenades in it. Oh, it couldn't be possible because of this. And, and people that are supposed to be the experts, you're finding out that this certain types of knowledge is going directly against what they said. So they've decided to fall on their sword and stick to their story and say, no, it couldn't possibly be that. One of the places I've been really curious about forever is the Sahara Desert, because they say that it's cyclic, and once it's a luscious jungle, then it turns into a desert, then it turns into a jungle again. Who knows what could be down there? When I was a kid, I had a book called The Omni. We just called it The All. But the idea just shows how kind of curious about all the stuff I was in the beginning. It was to look at all the mysteries of the world, write down what we thought they were, and every 5 to 10 years, go back and look at those mysteries and see if what we think they were have changed. And I joined the Air Force, and I come back home, and my mom had thrown that book out with all my comic books, and so I just lost out on the bit. So I just said, okay, little did I know I was going to come full circle after seeing some UFOs and then be asked to be a part of the task force to help investigate and figure out what they were. So I just felt I've been blessed that I get to do this, but now I think there's so much more, and I keep telling everybody, we have to collaborate to graduate. And I tell everybody that the app is for the believers and the in-betweeners. We've got so much work to do, because now we're fully realizing that there's a lot more here, and we just need to get our collective stuff together and go figure it out.
Yeah, the thing that triggered me was there was this book called God and the New Physics. I came from a pretty religious family, Catholic family, but for some reason, I joke with them to this day, is I didn't get the religious gene. Everyone else did, evidently, because they're all still religious, and it never clicked with me.
Yeah. There's 2 books I would tell you to look at. There's one called Adventures in Flatland. It's really thin, but it's about a one-dimensional being coming into contact with a 2-dimensional being. And if you take a look at that, it kind of gives you an idea on if we're dealing with creatures that are probably dimensional, how it might look to us. And then there's another book by Preston Dennett that talks about 100 schoolyard sightings and encounters that your audience might want to take a look at.
Gotcha. Good deal. But this God and New Physics was like, 35 years ago is probably when I did it. Let's say, probably when I was in my early 20s. And it was like taking things that we think of as a religious question and then applying the most current at the time theoretical physics against it. And it was like my mind just was blown open. And that's when I first began to discover what quantum physics was, what led to string theory. And that curiosity has gotten me today where now I'm an investor in 5 different quantum companies, all of which are doing really well, and multiple space tech companies, which are doing well, and love following conversations like this. I'm going to follow you big time now, as well as the other names there. And I look forward to some of our continued conversations, including breakfast tomorrow morning.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
All right, great. Well, thank you so much for coming out here. You actually flew in so that we could do this in person as opposed to doing it over the web. It was interesting enough to me, important enough to me that I wanted to sit down with you and have this conversation and get this published. And, I know the audience that I have, 90% of them, this is going to be the first time they really get exposed to, what you and I are hearing a ton about and experiencing a ton about. This is going to be a no exposure to them.
I have a friend who's a pilot, and he said, Logan, I've never seen a UFO. I thought of this whole thing as a hoax. I don't know where you were getting your information from. And he said, I've even talked to my friends, and he said, nothing. And So he had a clearance. So I was able to show him some of the stuff, and his mind went. So he went back to his friends, and he was like, I know this stuff exists. And then all of a sudden his friends goes, yeah, but I didn't want to tell you because I didn't know how you felt about it. So when you asked me, I thought you were just asking from a point of curiosity, not a person that knows that they actually exist now. And he is, sometimes I have to pull him back and say, dude, you're going too fast. You know, you're just believing everything that everybody says. No, I try to tell everybody, don't let people just tell you what's going on. Do your own research. And if you do your own research, you will see that there's enough incongruencies to say there's NHI out there. There's, we've got possibly a human interaction with the NHI. There's some kind of program going on out there. No definitive proof, but all the information would lead you in that direction to say there's a lot more going on than what we've been previously told.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. This has been a fantastic experience, and look forward to continuing the dialogue.
Anytime.
All right, man. Thanks, Logan.
No problem.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Bear Roars. If you enjoyed the episode, please like and subscribe on your listening platform. This podcast was produced by Loud Bear Productions and edited by Courtney Caruso with support from Kendall Weinberg, Emily Reed, and Gibson Siegert.